How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, and welcome to your 2020 year ahead horoscope for Aries, Sun, and Rising. Thank you guys so much for being here and liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. In this video, we're going to be going over all of the major transits of 2020 by each quarter and how they'll be affecting you. And now, while there is a lot of astrology happening next year, we're going to be briefly going over the major events so you guys have a general idea of what's going to be going on for you guys this year. Now, if you would like a more in-depth and specific analysis of what's going to be happening for you for 2020, please be sure to check out my website where you guys can purchase a year ahead reading from me, where I'm going to be going over all of the specific transits and the big major events that are going to be affecting you specifically for your chart for 2020. And if you like this year ahead horoscope and you also like weekly horoscopes and monthly horoscopes, please be sure to check out my page and subscribe for all of the latest astrology info and updates. And also follow me on Twitter if you guys like to talk about astrology and engage with me as well as a bunch of other astrologers. If you're not on astrology Twitter, get on there already. And if you'd like to support me and my work and get access to exclusive content and knowledge about astrology, be sure to check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/White Light Astrology. And now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the horoscope. So before we go into 2020, we're actually going to be having Jupiter move into Capricorn in December of 2019, but Jupiter is going to stay in the sign of Capricorn for the whole year of 2020. Now, Jupiter is a very positive planet. It's all about good luck, expansion, fortune. Jupiter has a lot of faith. It's very spiritual. However, Jupiter doesn't really work all too well in the sign of Capricorn. It's kind of like having to make do with what you have, and it ends up kind of working out because this is Jupiter. This is a good luck planet. Now, for you, Aries, Jupiter is going to be transiting your 10th house for the whole year. The 10th house is all about your career, your public vocation, how people recognize and see you. So as Jupiter's transiting Capricorn and transiting your 10th house, you're going to see an expansion, an increase in productivity when it comes to your career and what it is that you're doing in the world. So actually, starting January off on January 12th, we're going to be having Saturn conjoin Pluto. Now, this is a really big transit and it's a really big deal, but there's so much to talk about with it that I can't go in depth about it today. However, when you do have these Saturn-Pluto conjunctions, you do have a sense of change. You do have a sense of things kind of cementing in change. So this is going to be a pretty big step up for you guys in your career. If there's a goal you've been working towards or something radical you've been wanting to change about your work, this is when it's going to happen, and that's going to be in January. Now, moving forward into February, we're going to be having the first Mercury retrograde of 2020, which is going to be happening in the sign of Pisces. Aries, this is happening in your 12th house. So during February, you're going to be uncovering a lot of hidden and repressed parts of yourself. You're going to be acknowledging things that you might not have seen before. The 12th house is a place of isolation and inclusion, to get away from everybody. And as Mercury retrogrades through the spot, this may be a time where you take more time for yourself and to reflect on who you are, what you believe, and really what's going to work best for you. And then the next big thing that we've got going on in the first quarter of 2020 is in March, on March 1st exactly, Saturn is going to be entering Aquarius. Now, this is a huge deal, and I'm going to be actually doing a video to cover Saturn in Aquarius and its transit, because Saturn will be going through Aquarius for the next 3 years. However, Saturn is only going to dip into Aquarius and then move back into Capricorn later this year. However, you're going to see a really big change in energy because Saturn is the planet of limits, of structure, of foundation. How do we efficiently do things? What are our responsibilities? How do we represent authority, and how can we be more, adult, more disciplined, more mature about the way that we handle ourselves? Saturn is going to be going into your 11th house of friendships, of networks, of collective groups. So Saturn is really going to be giving you guys challenges and responsibilities within your area of networks, within groups of people, within friends, within organizations. This can be taking on bigger responsibilities, and this can be also seeing problems that you do have with bigger groups of people and how you can address them. And then as we get into April, we're going to be having Jupiter conjoin Pluto. Now, this isn't as big of a deal as Saturn conjoining Pluto like we just talked about, but this is still a pretty big deal because as Jupiter, the planet of our philosophy, the planet of our faith, of our beliefs, of good luck, it's in the sign of Capricorn, trying to muster up any good luck that it can while it's in that sign. As it conjoins Pluto, the planet of extreme change, of, if you read anything about Pluto, it's kind of intense sometimes. But a good way to look at Jupiter conjoining Pluto is a ratification or a complete change in what you believe or where you're finding your luck. And I think that that's going to be an important trait to to look at, especially as we move through 2020. Now, as we do jump into the second quarter of 2020, we're starting it off with, on May 5th, we're going to be having the nodes. So the lunar nodes, the symbols in your chart that basically show where the eclipses are going to be at. The eclipses point, or the eclipse points, or the nodes, are going to be moving into Sagittarius and Gemini. The north node's going to go into Gemini, and the south node's going to go into Sagittarius. With the north node being in Gemini, we're going to be starting to focus more on the information that we can accumulate, basically what communication comes into us, what information we have available, and what information we can find. This is happening in your third house of your ability to do things, of things that are in relative proximity to you, like your neighbors, like your siblings. The third house is also of teaching and understanding. So as the north node transits Gemini and goes into your third house, there's going to be this huge focus on what you're doing, how you're utilizing yourself, what you know, and how you're using what you know. Now, the south node on the other end is the thing that we want to not necessarily stray away from, but what we're wanting to step away from, what we're wanting to kind of work towards our way out of. And as the south node goes into Gemini, the south node goes into Sagittarius, which is the opposite of Gemini. This is where we're going to be releasing a lot of what we believed in the past. The sign of Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, so it is about belief, it is about spirituality, it is about faith. However, it's also going to be transiting your ninth house of spirituality, of faith, of long distance travels. And so as the south node hits Sagittarius and the north node hits Gemini, there's going to be this focusing on what you know and what you're learning versus what you believe or what you thought could be. And then right after that, we're going to be having Venus station retrograde in Gemini, and this is definitely one of the major signatures of 2020. And you have to remember, Venus retrogrades every year and a half, just like Mars retrogrades every 2 years. Now, Venus retrogrades coincide a lot with kind of not necessarily like a Mercury retrograde where it's about revisiting things, going over things. Venus's retrograde is kind of about releasing and switching our values over. And as Venus retrogrades in Gemini, in that sign of information, of communication, of sharing ideas with one another, this is where Venus, the planet of love and beauty, is going to start to really change its ideas of what information it's finding valuable. Now, this is transiting your third house of your ability to do things, of how you do things, how you utilize yourself. It's your third house of siblings, of neighbors, of, again, teaching, learning. We just talked about this. And as Venus retrogrades right here, you might start to see a really big value shift in what you're trying to understand, or maybe what you're trying to learn, or what information you're trying to access. Having a value switch and having kind of like a check with yourself is a pretty big thing, but this Venus in Gemini is going to be a time to really go over and consider and look at where are you placing your value and what is giving you value. And then, of course, the second quarter, we have the second Mercury retrograde of the year. To mention, in case you guys didn't know this, there are usually about 3 Mercury retrogrades every single year, so you don't have anything to worry about because it happens anyway. Now, Mercury retrogrades are a time to revisit, to replan, to go over things. And with this happening in Cancer, this is happening in your 4th house of the home, of the family life, of your private life, where you live, your parents, and all of the stuff that kind of comes with that. And as Mercury retrogrades, you might have some miscommunications with family members or people that you live with, but this is going to be a big time to focus on what necessities need to be addressed within the living space. You know, if there's something that needs to be taken care of, if there's someone that needs to be nurtured, and that can be including you, that's going to be the time to focus on it. And then as we jump into the middle of 2020 and going into the rest of it, now Saturn retrogresses back into Capricorn on July 2nd. Now, like we talked about earlier with Saturn going into Aquarius, kind of handing you guys new problems, new responsibilities, new limits, and new walls to have to go over, Saturn retrogressing back into Capricorn is going to make you guys go back to focusing on that career situation. Saturn's been in Capricorn for the last 2 or 3 years now. I'm sure you guys have had plenty of understanding of what Saturn in Capricorn has been doing for your career. However, as Saturn goes back into Capricorn, this is going to be the time to kind of handle off any last minute responsibilities, anything that you may not have been able to address over the past couple months. This is going to be the time to handle, be responsible, and be mature about whatever situation you're trying to create within that career space. And then right after that, on July 25th, we have Mars entering shadow. Now, I bring this up because we're going to talk a lot about the Mars retrograde this year, because the Mars retrograde is the thing that's happening this year. That's probably number one in my book. However, as Mars enters shadow and starts to slow down in July, this is where Mars is going to be in your first house in Aries. And this is kind of important because Mars slowing down and about to station retrograde, this is Mars, the planet of energy, of drive, of our intentions. And if it slows down, we typically start to slow down. And this is more important for you, Aries, because this is happening in your first house of yourself, of who you are, what you look like, how you perceive, how you react and respond. And so as Mars starts to enter shadow in your first house starting July, there's going to be a lot of events that happen between July and August that you're going to be going back over again and redoing and revisiting throughout September, October, November. But we'll be getting into that shortly. Then 3 days later, on July 28th, Venus leaves its shadow. So we went over all of the information we needed to understand, how to value shift with what we're understanding, with what we're wanting to communicate, and Venus finally gets to move forward. And then this one's a pretty big one. On August 4th, or actually I should say through August 4th through August 27th, Mars, as it's in a shadow, as it's slowing down to retrograde, is going to be squaring Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all in Capricorn. This is pretty hardcore because as Mars is going through your first house where you usually should feel more energized and feel more pumped up, it's squaring Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto all in your 10th house. So there's this conflict of you not having the energy, or maybe trying to refine or find out where you should direct your energy to overcome obstacles or barriers you can have in your career right now. Whatever changes you're wanting to implement, or whatever things that you do want to change, Mars squaring Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto is kind of giving you the nudge to like, hey, change isn't just going to happen because the universe wants it to. If you want change, you have to make it happen. But then we end the third quarter of 2020 with Mars actually stationing retrograde. Now this is a pretty big deal again because Mars will be close to the Earth. Mars will be able to be visible in the night sky. And as Mars does go retrograde and moves backwards, this is when we shift our energy and move it into a different direction. And like we just discussed, Mars is squaring Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in your 10th house. There's going to be a shift in where you direct your personal energy and yourself in your career. And it's going to have to, you're going to have to deal with some obstacles. You're going to deal with problems. Life's not perfect. And I'm kind of tired of people on astrology videos complaining that, like people aren't more positive. It's like, no, you're going to deal with challenges here. But during this time of September when Mars stations retrograde, that's going to be the time to switch your energy, find a new outlet, and do something different with the problems that you have. Because if you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, you're literally going to go insane. And then quarter 4 of 2020. This one's jam-packed, guys. We're kind of ending 2020 with a lot. And first, we're going to start off with between September 29th and October 18th, Mars retrograde now, but squaring Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto again. And so again, like I just talked about, this is that time where you're going to be switching your energy over. You're going to be dealing with some obstacles. You might have low energy. You may be a little bit more irritated than normal. But this is all going to happen regardless of how you feel about it. So knowing this information now is going to be positive for you guys to look at this summer, or I should say this fall and winter, and kind of decide where your energy is going to be best suited for you. And then on October 14th, we have the third and final Mercury retrograde of the year. It's happening in Scorpio yet again. And for you, Aries, this is happening in your 8th house of change, of death, of other people's money, of what other people have, and of hidden things. And so as Mercury retrogrades in Scorpio, I'm actually recording this right now in October of 2019, where there's another Mercury retrograde Scorpio. So I'd ask to reflect on what Mercury retrograde in Scorpio in 2019 did for you, because there's going to be very similar traits of what it's going to do for you in 2020. But this really sounds like, a miscommunication, or having to go over insurances. If you have anything to do with debt or with inheritances, Mercury retrogrades are a time to be going over that type of stuff when it's in your 8th house. And then on November 12th, we're going to be having Jupiter conjoin Pluto for the second time. Now, when Jupiter originally conjoined Pluto in January, this was the initial bang of like, hey, we have to change how we believe. We have to change how our beliefs operate, is a really good word for Jupiter in Capricorn. But as Jupiter goes back and hits Pluto again in November, this is where, we had the first initial taste of the change. We had to go back and actually make those changes. And now we get to really see the results of what changing our beliefs and changing the way that we look at the world world really does. And then the next day on November 13th, Mars stations direct. Thank God. It is going to be a long Mars retrograde. But as it stations direct and starts to move forward again, this is where you can start implementing those changes. And after switching your energy and trying to figure out where exactly it should go, this is going to be the time to start cementing that in, locking it in, and take charge with it. Then after that, on November 29th and December 14th, we have the eclipses yet again, but this time in Sagittarius, where when they were in Gemini and during, what was that? That would be May, you guys were going to be focusing more on what you need to learn, what you need to understand, what information is available to you. But as we get into the eclipses in the end of November and December, this is where it's going to be focusing on letting go of your past beliefs, letting go of things that don't serve you when it comes to your faith, when it comes to literally like what your beliefs are. And then 2020 just saves, I don't want to say the best for last, but the big finale for last, because on December 17th and December 19th, Saturn moves into Aquarius and Jupiter moves into Aquarius. And this is redoing the whole Jupiter-Saturn cycle for the past. So if you guys haven't looked at this up yet, you should look it up. Jupiter and Saturn conjoin every 20 years. For the past 200 years, they've been in Earth signs. Now, for this time, it's going to be in air signs. And so for the next, 200 years, every 20 years, Jupiter and Saturn will conjoin in air signs. And this is kind of the beginning of it. And like I said in the beginning of this video, this year has a lot of big stuff happening in it. And this is one of the big ones. And as Jupiter moves into Aquarius along with Saturn, this is where, like we discussed earlier about having more responsibilities and problems and walls and barriers with friends and groups and things like that. Jupiter comes into play and wants to expand this area, wants to bring good luck in this area. But with Saturn being there, what responsibilities come with having a greater amount of something? And that's kind of like the big thing with Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions. And basically on December 21st of 2020, we end the year with Jupiter and Saturn conjoining at 0 degrees Aquarius, basically kicking us off into 2021 with a big breath of fresh air and a big change. And that's basically how 2020 is looking. So like I said before, this was a general overview of what's going to be going on for you guys. If you want more specific analysis, feel free to reach out to me and book a reading with me for your 2020 year ahead so we can get all into the specifics of what this is going to look like for you. And with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here, liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you, and I'll be seeing you next time.